Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Reserved Investments. Today, we continue with the 13th episode of the 18,000 subscriber Q&A series. Now, we're not going to get through all the questions yet again in this segment, so there is going to be a part 14 to this series. That should wrap it up, I'm hoping. I do know it looks like this channel is fairly close to crossing over to 19,000 subscribers. Spoiler alert, there isn't going to be a 19,000 subscriber Q&A series just due to time constraints and the fact that I have too much other content that I want to get through on this channel, especially with all the wonderful auctions that are happening all around us. I do want to do some more interactive screen share videos where I teach you guys, at least show you how I analyze markets throughout the antiques and collectibles trade. So with all that out of the way, let's dive right into the questions. First question for today is on the vintage comic book marketplace. So here we go. Sean, in 20 to 25 years from now, when some of us are at retirement age or close, is there any hope for the future of the comic book collecting hobby? Considering younger folks today don't seem to collect comic books anymore. Well, it is true. If you look at the demographics, younger collectors, enthusiasts, even people who are fond of superheroes, they're not going after vintage comic books like older generations were. So if we look at like baby boomers, if we look at people in my generation, Generation X, a lot of us were actively collecting comic books back in the 1980s, back in the 1990s, even the early 2000s. Younger enthusiasts of superheroes are merging and identifying with their favorite superheroes through other means, mainly the movies, television shows, and video games. So it's really looking where, over the long term, at some point, comic books are going to start to die out as being a valid, applicable, investment-grade collectible like they are now. Now, the good news about this is you still have many, many decades to go before that happens. For instance, there's a lot of people that are coming to me through my consulting service, and they're asking me, well, Sean, with the low prices that are pretty much monopolizing what's going on in the vintage comic book marketplace, is this the beginning of the end? It is not the beginning of the end. I want to reassure you all of that. The reason why prices on a lot of vintage comic books are low right now, or appear to be low and extremely volatile, is because we had 2 decades of extreme exponential growth. And you guys know, if you're educated in finance, no asset class can continue to go up in value year after year without suffering any form of correction, without suffering any form of market pullback. This is something that the Pokemon collectors are going to eventually learn. They haven't learned their lesson the first time. They're going to learn it once again. Now, what does this mean specifically for comic books? It basically just means the next decade, the next 2 decades, are not going to have as much monumental gains as the previous decades that came before. Because if we look at the vintage collecting community when it comes to comic books, the major catalyst that came out of the last 20 years for comic books was third-party grading. Then you had the excellent handling of the Marvel Cinematic Universe when Disney bought Marvel, and now we see how much that contributed to the growth of this market. So going forward, the comic book marketplace is going to be in a period of transition as a lot of people tire of all the comic book movies. People are pretty much hung over from the high prices that resonated back when the pandemic was in full swing, when we were all stuck indoors and the government was throwing free money at a lot of us. A lot of that money ended up, we now know, in collectible markets. You had vintage video games, graded video games, comic books, even Rolex watches. All those markets were in mass speculative euphorias at that particular point in time. Now, with comic books, of course, we know there's a lot of organic collectability there, but the high prices couldn't last. So now there's a pullback, and people are wondering, is this the beginning of the end? The answer is no. There's still buying opportunities in this market. I want to reassure you of that. You go on the state and ask, Sean, Most of my comic book collection is in the Silver and Bronze Age. I will state this, you're going to have to be careful. If you are seriously parking money, though, in a lot of your Bronze Age keys, Copper Age keys, because all you got to do is look at the CGC census, and I've been pounding my fist on the table in video after video, arguing with a lot of people that books like Amazing Spider-Man 129, Amazing Spider-Man 300, X-Men 94, Giant Size X-Men 1, a lot of those books that a lot of you guys covet, they are not rare. The reason why they're selling for such high price points is simply due to demand. Well, obviously, if a lot of collectors start selling off their collections, supply of those books is going to increase. If that new supply that hits the market is not met with new increased demand, prices are going to fall across the board. And that's really kind of what's happening right now. So you really have to be careful where you are parking money long term in this market. Remember, smart money is going to save a lot of you. If you're a smart investor in this market, you can make money both over the short term and over the long term. The problem that we had during the pandemic, there was too much dumb money moving into all these collectible markets, and we see the fallout from that to this very day. So you ask one more question here. Sean, would you say 10 to 15 years from now, if the hobby stays relatively the same, is it a good time to get out? You sell when you're emotionally ready. I also encourage people to sell into the hype, because that way you capture the most amount of profit possible. And I'm sorry to say, this is a collectibles finance channel. I teach people the basics of investing in these markets, both over the long term and also, of course, over the short term. So if you want to profit from anything, you have to be willing to let go. You have to understand how these markets work, and you have to be willing to sell into the hype. So if you think you're emotionally ready, where you're not going to buy the items back after you sell them 10 to 15 years from now, then yes, I would say that that's an okay strategy. Again, this market's not going to fall off a cliff. What you're going to see is probably 20 to 30 years from now, there's going to start to be a very significant slow decline in this market that will play out, again, over the course of many, many years. And even during that time, there's still going to be peaks and valleys, meaning prices are still going to go down a little bit. They're going to rise a little bit. Most people aren't going to even understand that it's the end. This is what we saw with Lionel toy trains. Lionel toy trains, if you would do a price history on a graph of how much that market changed over the last few decades, you would see that in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that's when that market hit its peak. Now, believe it or not, there still are record-breaking sales in the market for Lionel toy trains. It's just that you can't look at the top 5% of the market and judge the strength of the whole market based on that 5%. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters do. Obviously, we all know Lionel toy trains were predominantly collected by the baby boom generation, and to a lesser extent, certain Gen Xers. Most younger collectors and enthusiasts are not flocking to toy trains as a valid collectible. I think we all can agree on that. All you got to do is study the demographics of that market. So I hope that gives you some insight into how I perceive this market to be playing out over the next couple of decades. Again, you can still make money in this market. There are still buying opportunities in vintage comic books. Keep that in mind. It is still a valid investment-grade collectible for the foreseeable future. Next question. Sean, you have discussed how to consider opportunity cost in investment decisions many times. I suggest you have a detailed discussion on transaction costs in investment decisions. I believe many collector/investor transactions are of negative value when full transaction cost is considered. Yes, early on in this channel, I talked an awful lot about that. Now, I don't know if you guys are aware of this. This channel is roughly 5 years of age. I don't know if any of you want to spend your time going back and watching vintage reserved investment videos, but that was one of the primary points when I first started this channel that I wanted to hit home about the basics of collectible finance. There's a lot of people that still do not understand this. Case in point, every now and then I get an email from a Pokemon speculator, a Lego speculator. They'll reach out to me and they'll say, "Hey, Sean, you don't understand. I paid $150 for this item, and 6 months later, I was able to sell it for $200. Now, don't get me wrong. On paper, that's a 33% return in 6 months. The problem is, though, you have to take into account the transaction costs and any other upfront costs that you incurred with taking possession of that item, meaning if you had to pay shipping and handling to get that item to you. You then also have to take into account any storage and insurance costs, the opportunity cost of holding that item, and also when you go to sell, are you paying shipping and handling charges to send it to the potential buyer, number one, and number two, how are you selling the item? If you're selling it on eBay, I'm sorry to say, you didn't make a 33% return because eBay charges a significant percentage of the final value fee associated with the sale of that item. So all this has to be taken into account. Again, I would be lying if I told you you can't make money in these markets. I'm living proof that you can. The problem is there are a lot of Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters out there that do not understand the business and the transaction costs that go into investing and speculating in collectibles. Remember, at the end of the day, these items have no underlying cash flows. Case in point, if we look at a Vanguard S&P 500 index fund, the ETF version of that fund, the ticker symbol is VOO, VOO, simple way to remember it. That fund charges a 0.03% expense ratio. Now, for a lot of you guys that are not educated in finance, I understand that probably means nothing to you. So let me explain what that means. On every $100,000 that you have invested in that ETF, that fund, VOO, you're going to get charged $30 per year. And that's going to be your only expense that you're going to have to pay to hold $100,000 of that investment. Obviously, if you have $1 million of that investment, it would be $300 per year you're getting charged to own that fund. There are no costs associated with buying and selling that fund. And most importantly, because that fund is based in stocks that provide ownership in 500 plus of the largest companies throughout the world, guess what? That fund also pays a dividend. There are underlying cash flows associated with that fund. So not only is that $100,000 going to potentially grow exponentially for each year or each decade that you hold it, every year you're also going to get a dividend from that fund that is paid out every quarter. And I think right now the dividend yield, I think on an S&P 500 index fund is like 1.5%. Well, on $100,000, that means you're going to get throughout the year $1,500 paid out on average, just to use that as an example. So you're paying $30 in fees to put $100,000 in that fund per year. The fund is paying you $1,500 per year in dividends on average, and you also have capital appreciation of that $100,000. This is why I get in arguments with Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters. If you're going to invest in antiques and collectibles, it works best as a diversification hedge. It should never, ever be the full meal. And unfortunately, in today's social media, social influencer-driven world, you have a lot of people that tout gold, silver, cryptocurrency, collectibles, antiques as the next great asset class. It was never meant to be like this. And those of you that get educated in economics, business, and finance, I know that all of you already know that, but the vast majority of people that are online listening to all these fake social media influencers, getting their information through confirmation bias, meaning I love Pokemon, therefore I'm going to listen to this guy over here because he loves Pokemon and he has money and he put all his money in Pokemon cards. That's why he has money. These are all false equivalences. And unfortunately, a lot of Timmies, Kimmies, and Poindexters fall down this trap where they cannot think critically. They do not understand how things in our capitalistic system actually work. They put their money in stupid things and they blame the wrong people for their lack of success. That's all I'm going to say about this. But you are 100% right. Collectibles, for the most part, especially up front, have negative cash flows associated with them. And when you go to sell, there are a lot of transaction costs that need to be taken into account that, unfortunately, the average speculator in these markets does not understand fully. Next question. Sean, you've given great financial advice, but when will we get a dating and marriage advice video? I do answer questions about dating, relationships, marriage from time to time, especially during the Q&As. I did one, I think it was part 10, where I did do a quick analysis on dating and relationship advice. I tell you guys this all the time. You got to learn to love yourself first. You should get into therapy, become self-aware, work through your issues, and hopefully, if you work through your issues and you learn to recognize that you are worthy and deserving of love, you will find someone who has that same mindset and you can build and grow together. You know, guys, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I have always been against hookup culture. Hookup culture was never my thing. That's why I laugh at all of these people on the internet, people like Andrew Tate, red pill, black pill, all this stupid stuff, trying to attract crazy chicks. I tell you guys this, work on yourself and pretty much everything else will fall into place with few exceptions. Obviously, there are certain things that you cannot control. You can't control what happens to you health-wise. You can't control what certain ailments you may have, what certain cliques you may have, quirks you may have, but you can get into therapy and you can work through those issues. You cannot control what happens to you, meaning if you're carrying around a lot of childhood trauma, that has to get worked through in therapy. It's not your fault that that happened to you, but it's your responsibility to make it better, not only for yourself, but the people that you bring into your life, whether they're just friends or whether they're romantic partners. So the best advice that I can give you, love yourself first, have enough self-awareness to get into therapy, realize your own issues, and hopefully you can work through pretty much anything that ails you, any problem that comes your way. And if you can do that, you're going to be a better long-term romantic partner for anybody that gets involved with you. And that's the secret. Next question. Hey, Sean, big fan of your content from the Great White North. Your content actually inspired me to focus more on my boring investments of index funds, and I've been gradually selling some of my collectible holdings for the past few years. Zero regrets, and I appreciate how often you repeat the advice for new viewers. My question is about how you think Trump's tariffs will affect the antiques and collectibles markets, both in the U.S. and abroad. I think it's obvious that people with less money won't be putting as much into these markets, but which categories do you think will be hit the worst? Which will be least affected? And what advice would you give to these people with their holdings? Okay, so let me just state this up front. Obviously, you guys know my political views. I'm not going to get political here. I'm not going to show a bias. All is what I am going to tell you is I am for free market systems. So in all actuality, I am against tariffs. I don't care who is putting the tariffs in place, whether it is a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, whoever it is. For the most part, tariffs really don't work. And there's evidence to show that. If you look at what happened during the Great Depression, you can see it kind of made our issue, our stance in the Great Depression much worse when a certain political party tried to enact tariffs at that particular point in time. So make no mistake, I am not for tariffs. However, I cannot control where we are right now in the year 2025 with whatever political party has seized power in the United States. So now that that's out of the way, let me just state, I honestly believe that a lot of the hoopla surrounding the tariffs is a little bit overblown. Now, to be fair to this particular individual, this question was asked months ago. Months ago, I probably would have given you a different answer. But now we see how this is playing out. And unfortunately, I am going to say this, Donald Trump isn't one to really stick to his guns. He pretty much throws spaghetti against the wall and sees what sticks. And in the case with tariffs, already we're seeing him shift and change his tune on where he was just a few weeks or a few months back. So I will say that's why I think a lot of the effects of the tariffs are a little bit overblown. Is it going to affect the economy? Is it going to lead to inflation? Yes, because certain countries he has not really backed off on. Now, as this relates to the antiques and collectibles trade, in all honesty, if you're collecting vintage antiques, vintage collectibles, obviously if you are collecting antiques, they would have to be vintage because the definition of an antique is 100 years of age or more. Any item that is 100 years of age or more does by definition become an antique. So if you are investing in antiques or vintage collectibles, I think you're going to be fine. There are certain modern era markets, like when we look at Lego, when we look at certain collectible card games, when we look at video games, where if the tariffs are set in place and they're there for a significant amount of time, it is going to affect those markets by and large. The markets that I'm concerned the most of from that perspective are modern era Lego products and also video games. Most video games, most Lego sets are made overseas. There really isn't any US manufacturing for those items. And given the fact that Lego is a foreign privately held company, I don't think that that'll ever be a thing. When we look at most video game companies like Sony and Nintendo, they're the top two. I don't think their products will ever be made in the United States anytime soon either, because again, they're both Japanese companies. So it really doesn't make sense in that regard. Now, that being said, I don't think you guys really have anything to worry about. Case in point, I'm recording this video after the successful launch of the Nintendo Switch 2 system, which I just recently did a video on. In the first 4 or 5 days of that launch, Nintendo was able to sell through 3.5 million systems globally. Most companies were prepared for the potential of tariffs, and as a result, they did increase inventory holdings for a lot of their stuff. So that is good news across the board. I can also tell you when it comes to most collectible card games, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, the big boys, they can be printed in the US if needed. I do know, if I recall correctly, Rudy with Alpha Investments would know for sure. I do believe there are manufacturing centers in the US set up to print those card games, in particular, Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, if I remember correctly. I don't know at present time, but very easily, those particular products can be produced in the US. So I don't see this being a big problem that people are making it out to be, simply because, and I hate to say this because I know it's going to offend some of you, Donald Trump really doesn't follow through on a lot of the things that he says. As a matter of fact, if we get my DeLorean time machine and we go back 3 to 4 months, I remember supposedly on Wall Street when the sky was falling because, oh my gosh, Donald Trump applied tariffs to certain countries, and then 3 to 4 days later, he pretty much backed off. And a lot of people, myself included, if you bought the dip back then, you made a lot of money. I know I was going pretty hardcore with tens of thousands of dollars into certain index funds when that was happening because I wanted to buy the dip on those specific days. As a matter of fact, I even posted that to my own personal Facebook account. I told people, I'm buying the dip. This is hilarious. This guy doesn't know what he's doing. And it just worked out for me. So again, I'm not trying to offend you. If you do have different political views than me, believe me, I'm not trying to offend you. I'm just saying, if you look at the history, the track history of Donald Trump, every time he's been in the White House, he really doesn't follow through the way that he states he does in a lot of these initiatives. So I don't think a lot of you guys have anything to worry about. Again, not trying to offend anybody with that answer. I'm just stating the truth. There are criticisms I could bring up against Barack Obama, even Bernie Sanders, who I love. And I would still be stating the truth with those criticisms. It's just the way it is. Don't hate me for that, bro. Next question. Thank you. Sean, love your content. You've given me more knowledge on basic finance than I got at both the high school and college grad school levels, which is really saying something about how we teach young people. I did want to pick a small bone with you about the graded video game market. You toughly, but fairly, gave it to WATA Games and Heritage during the Great Video Game Manipulation Controversy. It's just the way this question is worded. I'm not changing anything. It's the way he asked the question. I want to be very clear. That's why I worded it that way. Specifically, for a long time, you made videos bashing WATA for their lack of transparency with not providing population reports. In the years since the scandal, CGC has launched their own game grading service, and you could argue they have or are about to take over the market share from WATA Games. Well, first of all, let me comment on that. I think there is a lot of things that happened over the past couple of months, over the past years, where WATA Games is now on equal par with both VGA and CGC. I don't really put one company above the other. The main problem that I have right now is the fact that we have CGC and WATA using a vastly different grading scale than that of VGA, and that's what's creating right now a lot of chaos and confusion in the market. But I'm going to let you finish here before I respond any further. However, CGC has yet to provide transparency and provide population reports, even though they've been in business for years now and are Heritage Auctions' go-to grading company for games. Okay, that is actually patented false. Heritage Auctions does also use VGA. They do accept VGA games and systems into their auction, as well as WATA. Now, I don't know, to be fair, I really haven't had anybody come to me that is actually taking raw factory sealed games to Heritage. So I don't know if Heritage is steering a lot of their clientele that have raw factory sealed video games that they want to put up for auction. I don't know if Heritage is saying, hey, go to CGC rather than WATA or rather than VGA. I have yet to have an encounter in that regard, so I can't verify that. But you do go on to ask, can you please let CGC have it the same way you gave it to WATA Games? Thanks for all you do to keep people educated. Okay, this is a good worded question. I do want to respond to this criticism. First of all, my main problem with WATA Games, it wasn't so much the population report. That just added salt to the wound. It was their Pawn Stars appearance and the fact that, I want to word this carefully, they've allegedly engaged in market manipulation. And if you go and you watch the clip where the founder of WATA first appears on Pawn Stars, a grading company is not supposed to represent a buyer or a seller. Never. All is what a grading company is supposed to do. You send them the item, they look at the item, they don't care who you are, they don't care what you serve, whether you represent an auction company, whether you're just Timmy the collector who grew up with this stuff and just has a passion towards it. If you send them an item, they are supposed to provide an impartial analysis as to, is that item authentic? And if it is authentic, what grade are we assigning that particular item in question? That's all a grading company is supposed to do. So their appearance on Pawn Stars rubbed me and a lot of other experts in the antiques and collectibles trade. And I want to give a shout out to, because right now he's retired, but back when that particular episode aired, I can tell you firsthand, Harry Rinker, collectibles expert extraordinaire, he wrote an article on this subject, the Great Video Game Bubble, talking about alleged manipulation in this market as well. So I do have to give a shout out to him. Now, where am I going with this? That was my primary problem. The problem with the population reports was an added layer to that, because here we have a company that supposedly, based on their appearance on Pawn Stars, coming out of the owner's mouth directly, they're representing a seller for an item that they're grading, and they don't even have population reports to show what they're grading. So that was more salt in the wound. Now, with that being said, all that taken by itself, I am not excusing CGC for not putting out population reports, but I am giving them a little bit of time here because they didn't get involved with the secondary market for the items they are grading. And when we look at the reputation of Matt Nelson and crew, CGC, They have released population reports for comic books, for magazines, for other collectibles that they grade. So I do believe at some point, CGC will do the right thing and release population reports for the items they grade. Now that I said all that, in the year 2025, I want to be very clear here. My perception of WATA has changed a little bit because it seems to be after the initial push, after they were bought out by the fine folks that own PSA, PCGS, those grading services, WATA seems to be in the hands of new management. I have no problem with the management team that is now handling WATA games, even if some of those bad actors are still employed at the firm, because it looks like the company that owns PSA, PCGS for coin grading, banknote grading, also known as the Collector's Universe, they now own WATA Games. I do think that Collector's Universe should have changed the name of WATA Games. They should not have kept it as is because of the negative associations with the company and the brand. I mean, all is what somebody has to do. This is not me doing this. All is what anybody has to do is you just Google WATA Games and you're going to get hit with a slew of articles on bad press. And everybody always points to the Carl Jopes video that myself and Pat the NES Punk took a part in. But keep in mind, there's a ton of other bad press out there. So that is staying with that company simply because they made a conscious decision to continue with that brand name. I will tell you, however, though, presently, I think WATA Games is doing a very good job staying out of the secondary marketplace. I have no problems with their grading. I think the newly designed cases that they're using, the more flat cases for a lot of the games that they're grading, are spectacular. They're on par with CGC. I have no problems here. The problem that I have is what it did to the market overall. And this is why I get so mad at graded video game collectors and defenders of WATA. You had a company come into this market that either they were very naive, they didn't know what they were doing, or they had dollar signs in their eyes, and you all bought in hook, line, and sinker simply because you agreed with the product they were grading. And you wanted to believe it was going to be the next big thing. It was guaranteed to go up in value, and your entire video game collection was going to be worth a fortune as a result. And that was my problem with so many of the collectors, so many of the Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters out there that took WATA's side right from the beginning. If you're going to be successful in these markets, if you're going to be successful in any market, you have to at least have the ability to pull yourself away from these markets from an emotional standpoint and apply critical thought and reasoning. And I was very disappointed with the graded video game collectors out there that couldn't do that would just come into my comment section, scream at me, send me death threats because they backed this mysterious new grading company that came out of nowhere, appeared on Pawn Stars, and said that we represent the seller who has this particular item that we're grading. Not seeing an issue with that. And I hate to tell you, I am not the only so-called expert in the antiques and collectibles trade who has had an issue with this. If you read a lot of the top publications, I've said this before, Harry Rinker did an article on this. There's other publications other than Antiques and Auction News, other than the Journal of Antiques and Collectibles, other than Antique Trader out there where people have expressed a lot of disdain for WATA Games originally doing this, taking this course of action. And again, it's water under the bridge right now. WATA Games is how many years old? They belong under the Collector's Universe right now because they were purchased outright. Whatever they choose to do, I'm going to judge them on the merit going forward. We all know what happened in the past. We can't rectify that, but we can at least go forward together. Now, getting back to this, one last point I want to make. Yes, I do think that CGC should produce population reports. Again, I am confident over the next year or two, I think that they will. CGC really just got involved in this market only within the last few years. So I am going to give them the benefit of the doubt because, again, they didn't get involved in the secondary market when they first launched their grading company. Matt Nelson and crew knows what they're doing, as opposed to some of these other companies. I'm willing to chalk up the experience on Pawn Stars with WATA Games as just being an issue where they were not experienced enough to know what they were doing and the responsibility that they had. That's why I do forgive WATA Games. I'm stating this up front on this video. I own video games that are graded by WATA Games. I would be a hypocrite in this regard. WATA Games, when they sold the business to Collectors Universe, they did the right thing in that regard. Now, again, this could change if there are bad actors that are working for any grading company and they do start to do crazy, shady things, or they get involved with the secondary market. Yes, I am going to come down on them because that is a true ethical violation in the trade. It doesn't have to be illegal for it to be ethically or morally wrong. Keep that in mind, guys. Okay? So that should sum it up. Next question. Hey, Sean, what is your advice to someone like me who just managed to stop gambling investing on collectibles and wants to build a safer financial future while still being part of the fun? You go on to state, I recently paid off all my debt that I took partly to invest in collectible card games like Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and Flesh and Blood during the pandemic. Even though I invested in these cards since 2016 and made a significant gain off my collection, I wanted to step back from this behavior. Last year, I discovered your channel and you helped me a lot to finally make this change happen. I already started to save for my emergency fund and I invest 10% of my income in an ETF while still playing and collecting these TCGs as my hobby. Okay, so what your original question is, what is your advice to someone like me who just managed to stop gambling and investing on these collectibles and wants to build a safer financial future while still being part of the fun? Again, I have no problem if you're putting $500 or $1,000 per month, assuming you can afford it, in index funds, mutual funds, ETFs, whatever it is. If you have a financial plan and you want to take 10 to 20% of that money and you want to put it in speculative collectibles because that's your thing, you do you. What I am telling you though, the bulk of your investment dollars, especially when you are young, should go towards assets that have underlying cash flows. The easiest way to do that, just invest in an index fund. Take your pick, S&P 500, total stock index fund, total world stock index fund. Choose one of them, choose all of them. Just as long as you invest the bulk of your investment dollars on a regular basis through thick and thin, no matter what happens to the world or the market by and large, you keep investing in that, you can do whatever you want with a small portion of that money. So again, if you're putting like $500 in index funds per month, or even we'll just use this. Let's say that you have $500 left over. If you put $300 to $400 in an index fund every single month, that money that you have left over out of that $500, if you want to spend it on collectible card games, as long as you understand the risk as to what you're getting involved in, as long as you understand that there's a lot of people online that are giving you very bad information about speculating and investing in these markets, it's fine if you want to have a little fun. I have nothing against that. My problem is with the people that go all in. It's just like my problem with the Bitcoin bros. I have yet to ever encounter a Bitcoin bro that comes up to me and says, you know what, Sean, I really like your channel. I like what you do. I made a lot of money in Bitcoin, but I'm only putting in like 1 to 3% of my entire investment portfolio because I understand the risks. If that's you, excellent. You are one of the few and far between responsible Bitcoin bros that I've ever met, because most of these guys become obsessed with it. It's just like the Pokemon crowd. Most of these people in the Pokemon crowd, man, they're in too deep, man. They have houses, they have rooms full of this stuff. It is completely insane. If that market turns, you understand you are taking a very big risks. Always remember, successful investors, we look at how much we can lose, not how much we can make. That's why when I look at something like Bitcoin, I try to explain this to people. You understand, there's nothing that is underlying or propping up the value of Bitcoin at all, other than the greater fool theory. So tomorrow it could go to zero just like that. And people don't want to hear it. When we look at other assets that have underlying cash flows, those items have validity. Those items have a lot of value in the market. This is why if you look at the returns just from the 1970s and beyond, looking at a simple index fund, you're going to see it outpaced pretty much every other asset class in that same span of time. So that's the best advice that I can give you. This is going to sum up part 13 of the 18,000 subscriber Q&A series. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I have a feeling that I ruffled some feathers with this particular segment. Let me know if I did. I do apologize, but please understand, if you are going all in on any one speculative asset, whether it's gold, silver, collectibles, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, you are doing it wrong. I'm sorry to tell you. Thanks for watching and have a great day.